Please pull up on your computer or just look up here to that we just lost. The blank screen. I guess we're done, right? No, here we are. We are going to do something a little different to just get the conversation, to kind of cue us all into what the conversation are. We are going to do a pre-vote and we're going to do a post-vote, okay? And the pre-vote is we want you to look at this and kind of, at least in your own mind, think about where you are at this moment in terms of these three options. We're going to have Jeff take a few minutes and Ms. Patton, we're going to take a few minutes and just kind of, again, clarify or make sure that people understand the definition. If there's any initial questions about the definition, we'll take those now as a specific question about that, and then we will do our pre-vote, and then we'll have comments, dialogue, whatever, and then we're going to do a post-vote, which hopefully they'll result in some kind of consensus when we're done. So, Ms. Evans, and then Mr. Velkoff.
Yeah, on the last bullet, at the last meeting where we discussed this, Mrs. Smith had raised a possibility that is kind of a variation of this, but isn't actually up there. She had suggested revisiting the criteria and maintain the projects that are named in the CIP, which is different than what this says. So I think that needs to be in the mix as well. And you know, maybe Mrs. Smith would want to restate it herself since this was her thought. But as I understand it, revisit the criteria and maintain the projects named in the CIP.
Named?
Named in the CIP as opposed to funded projects that are already in design or construction.
So in addition to funded projects and named projects, I think is what I'm hearing.
Okay, that would be another way of saying it. That's actually probably a better way. Funded projects that are already in design or construction or named in the CIP. That's a way of putting it.
So it's a modified number 3.
Yeah.
Is it a modified number 3, or you want it to be a fourth?
No, it's a modified number 3.
Okay.
You know, with that understanding that named in the CIP.
So let me repeat just so everybody hears it. So we're going to do a kind of a pre-vote. We're going to have our dialogue, and then we're going to do a post-vote. If there's any other questions about the dialogue and the criteria up here, then we're going to take those right now. And Mr. Velkoff has one. And then we will go, and then Mr. Pottenberg will give the definitions again, and then we will do a pre-vote.
So really briefly, I just wanted to ask my colleague, Ms. Hines, are we doing a formative assessment followed by a summative assessment?
Yes, even school board members can be trained, right? We just, you work with us long enough, we can figure that out eventually. Thank you. Mr. Plattenberg, you want to restate the third one to get it clearer? Okay. Ms. Evans or Ms. Smith, can you help us with that?
You just add to the end.
Just look on the.
Revisit criteria and maintain funded/named projects. Revisit renovation.
Can you retype it? Is that what you're doing?
All other remaining projects.
Yeah, remaining projects in the queue.
Just.
And then the sub underneath would need to be changed as well.
Right.
Okay, Ms. Strout, this is specific to the definitions.
Yes,
okay.
yes, I do. In holding to what you have just suggested in the chart that we were given by staff, when we talk about named, I'm assuming by named it's every, the column where it says named in CIP cash flow, that is what we mean, including Falls Church High School, which is named in that list. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, thank you.
You're done? Okay. Any other questions about the definitions up here? And then yes, Ms. Smith?
I guess there's one thing missing that I thought was going to be a choice is no change in the criteria. And like the third bullet with the beginning, no change in the criteria. And maintain the funded projects and revisit the remaining projects in the queue. That's not the fourth. I thought there was a fourth choice of no change to the criteria. So I'm.
But if you don't change the criteria, I'm not sure how you would re-rank the queue in the remaining projects, because we consider what
So-
you had.
I think that's
So-
implied, what you're suggesting, Ms. Smith, is if we revisit any aspect of the queue, we would have to step back and look at the criteria. I think that's what staff's saying, right?
Oh, okay, I don't interpret it that way.
Okay.
To me, I think the criteria are great the way they are. We keep those criteria, but perhaps since the last evaluation, the condition of schools has changed. So this was my thinking. We keep the same criteria, and then we decide whether those schools that were just evaluated need to be evaluated again to see if they change in order. But I do not want to redo the criteria. I think they're great. So I thought that was another choice.
It may or may not change. I think that's something, if some version of number 3 was what the board wanted to do, I think we'd have to come back to you all and say, okay, let's talk about the queue.
I see.
And then you all could say, leave it the way it is, but go back and evaluate the schools. I think there's a lot of option in what the revisiting looks like.
So
So I get the
revisit
point.
the criteria could mean it stays the same. We would just consider if we should make any change. And that, I think, rather than getting, I think it'd be easier for us if we can keep it generally that, even if it means we would have a conversation and not make any change, and which is what you're, I think, part of what you're advocating could be a fourth choice. Does anybody have any, let me just, before I go on, because I'd rather close this out enough that we can move on. Does anybody have any particular advocacy about what Ms. Smith is saying, and whether or not we would have a fourth option up here? Yes, Ms.
Yeah, I'm going to advocate for what Kathy, because in the past, we have gone back and done a review based on current criteria, and it has changed the queue because some of the schools have changed their needs.
Yeah.
And then you consequently can recognize either deteriorating infrastructure,
Yeah, no,
huge
I
overcrowding.
think we get all that.
So I like the wording of her fourth option. So
Give it-
fourth option.
We can have as many as we want, to be
Right.
honest. And if we can
Keep
keep
the-
us, if it can get us,
Keep the
clearer,
queue,
then
keep
that
the
would be better.
criteria, but reevaluate the schools that have not been named against the current criteria.
So reassess those remaining projects based on the
Reassess them.
conditions of those
Exactly.
schools
Do a
today.
third party, yeah, and that can have an impact.
I need you to put it up there. Just, can you flip it? Would somebody read the fourth, kind of help Ms. Goddard?
Oh, I think Susan can help. Yeah, no change to the criteria. And it would keep the no change to the criteria, maintain funded projects, reassess remaining projects in the queue, correct? Okay.
And if we could pull that up before we actually raise our hand, that'd be. Yes, please. And then at least we'll make sure that everybody's,
Need to see it.
I mean,
Read a poem. So, yeah.
okay. Ms. Goddard has put up on the screen, she's making it a little bit larger for us, the four kind of choices that we at least seem to be narrowing down to.
Mr.
and-
Stork, on the fourth one, I'm assuming, Ms. Smith, it's funded or named projects already in the CIP. Yeah. So it's funded and named projects. That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
So we don't just support anybody.
Is that the language up there, what people were at least understanding, is that we have a consensus on at least what those choices should be at the moment. And they can, look, we can modify this further. I just want, trying to get a pre and a post on this. So there'll be plenty of time to fine tune these more if people want to do that. But
Just
okay.
for clarification between 3 and 4, because Pam just changed that reassess. That's reassessing using the new criteria, whereas the 4th one is reassessing using current criteria. Okay? Yeah.
Current criteria, yeah.
I don't understand then how 4 is different than 1.
I think that's,
Number three is the Q, the standards, the criteria can change. What does 4 bring in?
One, you're not touching the queue at all.
Not doing anything.
Four, you're going to reassess.
Number 2 is nuclear option. That, you start all over, even with name.
yeah, that's where I was.
Oh, well, Jeff will describe, right?
Okay, again, please look at the 4 up here. Is the language seem to be right, folks? Does the language seem to be right for at least our conversations thus far? And Mr. Plattenberg, are you comfortable enough to try to explain what your understanding of those are?
Absolutely.
By new criteria.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think it hurts to put that up there. Okay, Mr. Plattenberg, you're on, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And you know, actually, with this agenda item, really, we've started out, like Stephen Covey would say, is beginning with the end in mind. So, really, this discussion had gone on since the last work session, February 9th work session, wherein we talked about the status of projects within the renovation queue. And there was some question about wanting us to bring back what the definition of the queue was. So we've provided you with an attachment that lists all of the renovation queue status of the projects, that shows a listing and so forth that you can peruse down. And in the categories of each of those, it has the school name, the queue rank of the 63 projects that are listed, whether they've been named in the CIP, cash flow, when the planning was, when the construction was, and the upcoming or status, if you will. And that's really for your edification. So when we do have the discussion about should there be any kind of desire on behalf of this body to make some changes to the existing facility assessment criteria, to the existing weighting of those criteria, you basically have 50% that are facilities related and 50% that are instructional related or parity. So with that, you know, we have now the 4 different, really looking for kind of concurrence of having basically no change, maintaining the current queue, revisiting the current criteria and maintaining the current queue, revisiting the criteria and maintain the funded/named projects, while reassessing all other remaining projects in the queue using new criteria. And then the 4th option, no change to the criteria, maintaining the funded and named projects, and reassess all other remaining projects in the queue using current criteria. So really in that discussion framework, it would be whether or not we like the queue, we like the ordering of it, or some variant form of we like the criteria, the existing criteria weighting in percent, or we would like to change either one of those.
Thank you, Mr. Plattenberg. Any comments before we do a pre-vote? Ms. Smith, did you have something?
So I do have another question. We're so focused on this current queue of 63 schools, but my question is, are there other schools that would get evaluated? Because obviously this whole 63 isn't getting evaluated because they've just been done. Are there other schools that have been renovated ages ago that get added? So I guess I want to know what is the
Universe.
parameter, thank you, of the schools that would get evaluated?
So, when we put this together a number of years ago, I think it was 2008, 2009. We had schools that were close to that limit. If you recall, we were looking at it was schools that were built or constructed, renovated prior to 1992, which was kind of the advent of a more modern ed spec. But there's a bunch of schools that were right on that periphery that were renovated with a combination. A good example is Luther Jackson, which if I was going to reevaluate, I would pull some of these schools in, like Luther Jackson, that just barely made that cut, so they would be included. And in fact, over time, there are schools that are aging out that probably should be put into a renovation queue. That would be my recommendation over
Okay.
time.
So you would base that on either their age or when they were last renovated to
Correct.
see if they should be evaluated. I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to do a pre, and then we'll have whatever discussion you all would like to do. I'll try to keep the comments, I'll try to do 2 minutes a person, at least on the next stage, and then we'll, if we need to go back, we will, but I know we're way behind, and we're trying to just keep moving this along. So we have 4 options on the table. I'm just going to do a show of hands for each option, and then that'll give us some sense of where we are, and then we will come back and revisit this at the very end of the conversation as well. So all those who would prefer the no change, maintain current queue, raise your hand, please. Okay, that was an award winner. Revisit criteria and maintain current queue. Number 2, revisit criteria, maintain current queue. Those in favor of that? That's a no-brainer. And 3, revisit criteria and maintain funded/named projects. Reassess all other remaining projects in the queue using new criteria. We have 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. Did I count that right? Okay. And then number 4, no change to the criteria, maintain funded named projects, reassess all other remaining projects in the queue using current criteria. And we have
I'm going to vote twice, just so you know.
5, so we, it's
Oh, well,
2. Did somebody
because
vote
I don't
twice?
care between 3 and 4.
Okay, that's fine. So we have a sense of what it is. I just want to get close. Okay, those who would like to speak first? I don't have anybody on the queue for this conversation, so anybody? Anybody have any comments they want to share, or any dialogue they want to have on this issue? Before we, well, I provided, the intent was to provide initial pre-vote, and then if people had any comments after that might persuade others one way or the other, or might help us to understand a point that they think we haven't considered, and then we will do a final kind of consensus to try to move this issue forward. Okay? So I have Mr. Anna Koufax, and then Ms. Smith, you'll be next.
Mine would, just so you all know, I voted for number 4. My question to my colleagues, you are in the majority, I would like to hear a little bit about what you want revisited in the criteria and the reasons for.
Ms. Smith?
Should we bring those back out?
Yes,
The
please.
criteria.
Thank you. Yes, the criteria, revisiting the criteria, the current criteria for the queue.
And if I'm out of turn, but if staff could just review what those mean, just so we're all on the same page.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, good point.
They had the criteria.
She's going to bring it up.
Right up there.
There you go. So, Mr. Plattenberg, Mr. Sneed, somebody give us your professional assessment of what those mean?
Oh, sure. And as Jeff indicated earlier, during the last assessment, we introduced new manners in which to perform evaluation. So there's 2 that really deal with the educational spaces. That's either the fundamental educational requirements, those are your core spaces. So at an elementary school, that would be self-contained, special ed, or K through 6 classrooms, or if you had Head Start spaces such as that. So that's a core space at the elementary level. At the middle school level, you would look again at the core: science, English, social studies, math, and then the 5th core, because everybody has to take it, or PE spaces. So, and then finally, at the high school level, it was the 4 core: English, social studies, science, math. In both the middle and high, it's special ed. And then you looked at other spaces. We had PE spaces because a lot of the students are at least required through 10th grade, and then world language spaces such as that. Supplemental includes an evaluation of rooms that are really elective. At the elementary level, we realize everybody's taking them, but the students aren't there all day long. So music, library, art. Obviously, when we get to high and middle school, there's quite a bit more of those, but they don't count as much. Facility condition assessment, we didn't just have architects who evaluated the spaces for size, quality of the equipment, the ability, one of the criteria when we said fundamental educational requirements was, can the space is it suitable to deliver the program of studies? So we talked a little bit about schools like Fox Mill or Clearview that have the mountable partitions. You remember our old open schools? They would be marked higher because the classrooms were of an odd configuration or have different walls. But the facility condition assessment, we actually sent electrical and mechanical engineers in to look at both the boiler, chilled water system, power, things of that nature, facility age. Again, that's a straight line, just when the school actually opened, and then code compliance. When a school opened, you were just looking at comparing what type of changes would be required to bring the building into compliance today. Now, a couple of years ago, we actually had a meeting with parents. I don't know if you all remember that. And one of the feedback, a lot of the feedback that we received from the parents was that the criteria should be weighted different at elementary, middle, and high level. And if I could go back and try to find that report, because of the way the fact that music and at the higher the middle school level is of a different nature. So I'll try to find that report and send it back to you guys. Does that help, Ms. Reed? Okay.
Ms. Smith?
I don't know if I want to have a double discussion. I think that these criteria cover what we want to cover, looking at the different pieces. So that's why I voted not to change the criteria. I can't picture what you would add. I think this takes care of the features in the building we need for the program and for the condition of the facility.
Okay. Ms. Velkoff?
So to cut to the chase, I know that, what we've heard from many of the folks in the Falls Church High School area is that there's something about the way that the criteria were set up that perhaps disadvantaged Falls Church High School. And I'm trying to recall, because one of the issues I remember had to do with the fact that Falls Church was small. Okay, but I don't see, how does that come out of here? Because I'm actually not seeing this.
Right, so there was a capacity piece that was removed. So we did two rankings, one November, December of 2008. The Mason District school board member asked, because Falls Church was further back in the queue, there was a vote, the board asked to take capacity out. Now, you get a little bit of capacity here because when they look at the fundamental educational requirements, they are seeing whether you have adequate space to do that. I mean, one thing that happened, and now what Falls Church is running into now is the fact that they're approaching their actual capacity in the school. So they had some spaces, and I'm talking about in the core, that some of those other schools just didn't have room to do. I mean, so if you looked at West Springfield or Herndon or some of these, they had almost whole departments outside. Falls Church is about to, I think, looking at their projections are about to start to face that, and some of those are going to go away. They won't have as much flexibility to deliver the program.
So in other words, the current criteria actually were adopted after Falls Church High School's position was set in the queue. Is that what I'm hearing?
They actually moved up when we took the capacity out. They improved by 9 spots.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
But to further that just a little bit, what you just said, Kevin, I want to make sure, because this is kind of where you were leading. If we, this is just a guess, but based on what you just said, that if we applied the current criteria potentially to Falls Church today, that based upon changing conditions for that school, that they may very well, the ranking could be different? And is that what I heard you just say?
Yeah, I think what's going to happen, because they have some flexibility within the building, they have some space, they had spaces dedicated to programs. There's not a whole lot, but they happen to be situated in the core instruction. So I think, this is, I doubt the folks at Falls Church are upset. They've got a lot more kids coming in. Is that they're going to wind up having to face a different reality, which is trying to find space. And I think it'll be more challenging for them to deliver all those programs as they have just a lot more regular classes going on with the increase of students.
Thank you, Mr. Velkoff. Ms. McLaughlin, then Ms. Schultz.
So just quickly to what Ms. Smith was asking, I think it's not necessarily changing or adding any more bullets. It's just saying, given where we've assigned the weighting, are we in agreement with that? Or might the first two bullets where it's 40%, next one's 30%, maybe the weighting would change through our board discussion. That's kind of where I'm thinking. And that comes from talking with each other and figuring it out.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Schultz, then Ms. Evans.
So this is we keep tying back into previous conversations, not only the conversation we had this morning, but Ms. Hines, I can't remember when you recently told us about, I believe it was McNair Farms, and they had the installation of an outdoor bathroom, which, I can't even, it's hard for me to say that with a straight face. So when I look at situations like what McNair Farms is, and I don't even know where they are in this, or as I was talking to,
It's a new school.
Right. Or as I was talking to Ms. Strauss about the point that Ms. Derenak Koufax brought up earlier this morning about the inability to hold programs that you could previously hold because of a change in a school's, overall facility use with increased population. It's almost as if I'm wondering if there doesn't need to be a renovation light. So there was a point at which the board was doing boundaries, and then we went to, let's have a boundary light process where there becomes a situation that develops outside of what was already established that now needs to be taken care of, and we don't need to do, the whole enchilada, but, we may need some side dishes. And McNair Farms, the thought of installing an outdoor bathroom, for the kids out in trailers, or for Willow Springs, because they don't have the infrastructure to support the students, regardless of what the capacity of the building says. So it's like we need a different. So the reason I'm supporting something else is I don't know what the criteria would work out, but it's almost as if we need a second light version where we can go in and strategically do a strike force, pick something up that needs to be done, but not do a platinum-plated standard renovation. It seems like it just pushes all of the things back in the queue further, where we may have to be more discriminating about wholesale deep renovations where we're carving out whole sections of buildings and it takes 3 years, et cetera.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. Ms. Evans.
Yeah, just for clarity,
Sorry.
We've talked about this, scaling back renovations. I know, I can't even remember how long I've been the director, back to 2006. This is we've 3 times we've discussed it. We'd be happy to do it. There are some spaces that you can't just simply go in and renovate. If we look at those 5 legacy high schools where we did the science labs inside, so if you look at Stewart, Annandale, Madison, Lee, yeah, the rooms are big, the ceilings are not tall because of the structural bays in the building. I mean, they're not, the kids can learn. I'm not saying that, but so it's not that simple. And then this same question came up about, well, why can't you just do a mechanical system? Well, you know, mechanical and electrical upgrades are about almost 50% of a renovation cost. So, and I can't just, you know, it would be just like a regular renovation. I've got to take the ceilings out. I need access to the spaces. I mean, these things are very, very complicated because of the fact that the schools are occupied when you do it. So, you know, even trying to scale them back would be very, the school would still experience it as if it was a regular renovation. I'm not, you know, I'm happy to do what you guys want, but I'm just trying to.
I agree, and I'm not asking you to go into the pros and cons all the way, but as Dr. Garza said in this morning's session, you know, at the end of the day, it's the staff that you've got in the facility, and it's not that we don't need comparable facilities for our students to learn, but buildings don't educate students. And so I just think that we're going to have to get to a point where there's going to have to be some prioritization, some discrimination going on if we're not getting hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's the discussion that we need to have. So that's why I want to vote for changing it.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Schultz. Ms. Evans.
Yes, thank you. And my question is, regarding Falls Church High School, based on what we've just done, Falls Church would not actually be reevaluated, would they, under what they would, because they are named? So none of these things, if we change these, would apply to Falls Church, correct?
I assume that's what you guys are voting to do. That's what we're asking direction.
Right, because they're named already. Okay. So, and they would just take their place in the queue. I mean, I do, for moving forward on other schools, I do wonder whether code compliance and facility age might not be higher because, you know, I think our schools need to have code compliance, you know, that might be a little stronger. But I just wanted to clarify that the new criteria wouldn't apply to Falls Church. And by the way, in answer to Mr. Velkoff's question, partially, the issue wasn't just the criteria. Part of it was the assessment, and the Falls Church community feels very strongly that the assessment underestimated the where they were. That they didn't feel that was that the independent review put them where they should be.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. We have Ms. Strauss, and that's it for my list.
Okay, I would caution people on looking at renovation light. That's part of why Falls Church is where they are. We had a whole bunch of schools that were given partial renovations in 1989 to 91, 92. So we've discussed this one several times in the past, and I've cautioned against doing a partial renovation. In the list that we're looking at, that obviously does not contain the actual new construction that's already in there, because in reference to McNair, we are planning for a new elementary school, which is badly needed in that region. So the queue that you're showing us is simply renovations, expansions. It's not new construction, because no matter what we do here, you still have the ability to go in and do either program moves or brick and mortar fixes based on profound overcrowding, because we've done that in the past, right?
Correct. And we've talked about this numerous times. If we have a capacity need, it takes priority over renovations, and we do the best to fit it in where the board is agreeable to it.
Thank you, Ms. Strauss. I have Ms. Reed.
Thank you. Based upon the discussion we had earlier today, it seems to me that we need to add capacity as a particular criteria. So right now, I think we're just focusing on kind of our overall reaction. So that's one. It seems to me that the facility condition and age are kind of interrelated, right? And I know in some of my schools, particular educational opportunities are not availed to the students because the wiring is so old that the technology can't be included, or the light bulbs for the planetarium at Oakton no longer are made, so they can't use the planetarium, things like that. So the age and the condition certainly do impact the fundamental educational requirements, so it does get a little bit murky. I do agree that the code compliance is one that we need to really examine. In some cases, it's truly a safety issue. I know at Falls Church, they've got special ed kids on the second floor, and they tell us that there's no fire safety plan to get those kids out quickly, if they can't get down the steps and there's no elevator, those kinds of things. So I'm just throwing that out there saying code compliance, if there are safety-related issues, we might need to look at that as a higher priority. And last but not least, I shall mention once again the issue of programs. And I know it's not necessarily related to the criteria, but as we look at how these criteria are applied. I know in the case of Falls Church, they felt they almost were penalized for being the nice people that took in all these extra programs. So again, I don't know if that's fact, fiction, perception, or whatever, but certain programs that are placed at facilities, it does beg the question, do they need to be there? Is this somehow incorporated into the thinking? And as they reach their capacity, we may need to be thinking about moving programs to other places like we talked earlier today. So in general, I think this is good. I would add capacity, and I might kind of reconfigure some of these things, but that's my initial reaction.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. We have Ms. Hines.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understand. So right now, in current criteria weighting, it sounds like under fundamental educational requirements, a lot of things go in there. And does capacity also go in there? Is that what I'm hearing? I mean, if you don't have enough room?
Well, you don't get you wouldn't get a full capacity. There's a little bit if the school was vastly over, but not enough to tilt it. But, since we're talking about Falls Church, it's basically the same generation as West Springfield, Herndon, and Oakton. They're all open about the same time, but those other schools had 600-700 more kids at the time of the assessment. It would seem like they were short quite a bit of their fundamental spaces at those other three, and Langley was in that group.
Right. So if we didn't add capacity specifically, we can't be sure that we're capturing it in this criteria, right?
Not completely, no. And in fact, and I think we published this quite a few times, as we showed with just capacity removed, what the change to, so you could see it was more dramatic than this. This captures a little bit of capacity, but it's not the total piece.
Any first-time speakers? I just have a question. Oh, Ms. Belkoff? Oh, go back. Okay, well, hold on you for a minute. I'm not clear. Is staff recommending that we keep the existing criteria, or are you suggesting that we should consider other changes to the existing criteria?
We're requesting some type of guidance. We've had so much feedback on...
But my question is not about guidance. My question is, as professionals and who have a great deal of knowledge about facilities and how they should be assessed or not assessed, and the engineers that you work with, the architects you work with, are they saying that this criteria is the right criteria? Or are they saying to tweak it this way or that way might be helpful? I'm trying to get your...
Yeah, no, the sense of, from our professional standpoint, where we're viewing our advantage is, let us exercise what was committed to and what was obligated to go ahead and complete these 63 projects. And then at the conclusion of that, then let's go ahead and identify what type of evaluation model we want, what kind of procedures we want. But in our way of marching down that road, that path, it wasn't like the British and we're getting picked off by the Tories behind the trees. It was all of a sudden there was a lot of different insight given some folks in certain regions as to why they felt something else should be a part of the mix. So that was where staff was working towards.
So I would translate to be that basically you're satisfied with the existing criteria. You're not aware of any really significant changes that need to be made to that criteria. Because we took out the capacity issue, which was the core of the Falls Church issue, as I always understood it. That's not part of the criteria that we're using now to go forward. Is that accurate? Okay. And Dr. O, please, yes.
No, I was just going to say, yes, you all had asked for this conversation, and so that's why we brought it forward. It wasn't because we felt like, it's just, this is part of kind of your job, isn't it? To do these kind of hard things like this heavy lifting. So I think this is a good conversation to be had. So that's why we initially brought this forward. All we're asking for today is for you to give us guidance on one of those 4 options. And so I had another board member ask me about their weighting. We're not suggesting today is a good a day to talk about the weighting. We're just saying this is what our current weighting is. If you all want to reevaluate the weighting, the criteria, and the weights, that would need to happen another day.
Okay.
If that's, we didn't come prepared to actually go through an exercise of
Sure.
adjusting the weighting here today.
I guess so. I wanted to at least see if the weighting it's not a problem from staff's perspective, and in and of itself, we wouldn't be having this conversation if staff felt, or we would be having a different conversation if you all felt that we should have a different weighting than we have today. That's part of my assessment of whether or not I should change how I see going forward, is if this criteria, again, the way we've changed it, which it doesn't include capacity for the most part, if this basic weighting process that we have here, that would be is acceptable and seems reasonable. I could argue 5 or 10% either way on some of these, but in the end, you end up about the same place. That's what I'm trying to assess, whether or not it's worth another discussion about the weighting to plus or minus 5%. So.
Mr. Stork, I know what you're asking. Essentially, what is our recommendation? And I'm going to really stir it up now because I'm about to tell you what mine personally is. I didn't ask these guys at the end of the table. But I do think, and I think the motions before you or the options before you may address this, I do acknowledge that we need to do something at Falls Church High School. I think we all recognize we've got
absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, and
yes.
so I think how that upsets the apple cart, I don't know, but I just think that does warrant some consideration. I do think one of the options available to you all would necessarily require that we change all of this to meet the needs of what we've maybe recognized that exist at Falls Church High School.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say that the criteria weighting, the current criteria weighting, the evolution and the process associated with it. Some folks are saying, well, you look at the trajectory of the CIP and you see your capacity issues and you see your needs, and therefore it is paramount that you include capacity as a fundamental function of evaluative model, one of your metrics. And I say to that is that we have been addressing the capacity issue through renovation, addition, and our process and our practice. In other words, we've been skinning that cat, even though that hadn't been and was a previous component of it. If we weren't addressing it, and albeit given the fact that we're behind and our cap and all of where we've identified clearly where our needs versus what we're actually funded at. But if we weren't addressing that, then absolutely, I would say revisit it. The public process that went into this, and I look to Mr. Sneed to correct me if I'm wrong, and the parent involvement and so forth in the development of these criteria, it's my understanding that was a pretty long, involved process for those that were a part of that. And therefore, that is the reason why we're saying what Dr. Garza said so articulately.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Steed. Mr. Moon?
Thank you, Mr. Stroke. I was going to ask you, Mr. Stroke, will you, how you work, Mr. Stroke? Are you listening? I was going to ask you as a work session manager, how you were going to lead the discussion from this point and on before I make a next comment, which has to do with criteria weighting or weighting of each criteria at this point.
Hopefully,
I'm going to take a post of voting right now.
We're going to have another kind of consensus vote about where we are, and that would determine how we go forward, at least in my eyes, which is if it's, well, depending, and we'll see the 4 different options that we have.
Sure.
So earlier. It really appears that we have 2 options, to be honest.
Sure.
So
earlier I voted for an option which was not what the majority, board members supported.
If you can bring that out right now, that would be,
sure,
I think it's appropriate.
Sure. If it stays that way, then we are going to be reviewing the criteria whether today or some other time, that if that were the case, I would like to hear sort of rationale from our professional staff members on why 40% for the first criterion as opposed to 10%. Because I as a lay person.
See, we will have that as part of the revisitation would automatically do that. So if you support that, then they're going to come back and they're going to give us, they're going to spend time
Thank you.
doing
That would
so.
be my next step request if we
That's
were
my
to do
understanding, yes, okay. Any other first-time speakers? And then we have go-backs. We got three go-backs, I believe. I hope I didn't miss somebody. I know Mr. Velkoff, I think you were first, and then Ms. Schultz, and then Ms. Evans. I'm sorry, you were the one I realized I'd missed. It was deliberate, of course. I mean,
So my understanding then is that with capacity not in these criteria, the way that we're actually addressing that is our discussion that we had earlier, which is basically we're just saying every time we renovate something, we're going to address capacity at that point. Is that right? So basically that we've got that piece covered, right? Okay.
and Ms. Smith, I don't know where you were, but I think you were early up, so I'll go to you next, and I'll go to
Thank you.
Ms. Schultz and Ms. Evans.
I guess I'm going to refine part of what Ted said. We are dealing with capacity when we need to outside of renovations, like what happened at Luther Jackson. Luther Jackson had capacity issues. We dealt with capacity, but we haven't renovated the school. And that's why I do not believe that we would want to add capacity into these criteria, because we have found a way to deal with capacity differently, and sometimes capacity issues are in newer schools that wouldn't be on the list anyway. So I would be opposed to adding capacity to this.
And I think that's where we are at the moment, because that's what we've kind of come to as a consensus. Dr. Garza?
I sincerely hope I'm not muddying the waters, but I'm trying to have clarity here. On 3 and 4, and I believe Ms. Smith and Ms. Evans were the ones talking about changing the option a little bit, where it says maintain funded / named projects. I'm referring back to this chart. Do you mean named in CIP cash flow? Can we use the specific language so that it's clear?
Named in CIP cash flow.
Yes, and the next one we need to do it. And rather than a slash, put or.
And.
Yeah, it is, and. Yes.
It won't.
That's what we've been saying so far.
Well, if it's funded, I don't think so, because.
Oh, no.
Is it?
Hang on. Or named.
It's not funded. It's funded or named.
All we're suggesting is the list that's named in the cash flow. Cash flow, that's correct.
Okay, we are, Ms. Goddard, you got that? Okay, thank you. Ms. Schultz, you are Dr. Goddard,
I was
you
just going to say, I know this is a little tedious, but this is important.
No, this gets us moving along.
To get it
Yes,
right.
it does. Yep. Ms. Schultz.
I want to make sure that we're discriminating correctly between capacity and enrollment, because we keep talking about capacity, but one of the things that Mr. Sneed brought up, and that I think, I'm not sure if it was Ms. Reed identified, part of the weighting criteria that doesn't appear here and that we haven't talked about is the number of students potentially impacted or not impacted if we don't make a decision. And the reason why that's important is, Ms. Evans, how many students are currently at Falls Church?
A little over 1,900.
Okay, I was going to say 1,800. So 1,900 students. So if we have a decision before us on, 1,900, something that's going to affect 1,900 to 2,000 students versus something that's going to affect 200 students, I think that it's the board's responsibility to take that into consideration about the overall impact to the number of students. So it's sort of capacity, but not actually capacity. It's not. that doesn't directly cover it. It's how many students are impacted by this decision. And we have to carefully evaluate it. I'm not saying that it always tips it, but I do think it needs to be taken into consideration by the board.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. I have Ms. Evans.
I was actually going to make the same point that Dr. Garza did, but I do have another question. And to Elizabeth's point, these criteria, though, are going to be what we use for the next renovation queue. When we establish a new renovation queue, after we've finished with the ones that are named in the cash flow, and so taking capacity into account just isn't going to work because capacity changes all the time. You can have a school that's.
That's my point. Is that I don't want to do capacity. I'd like to.
Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, okay. Great. Thank you.
Any other go-backs, any other points that need to be made? And we have the 4 criteria up here. And so the 4 criteria so far, we're mostly going to be narrowing down to the last 2, just so people know. And we're going to try to make a decision, I guess get a consensus from that if we can. So Ms. Reed, did you have a?
Just a quick question for staff, and that is when we're looking at capacity and enrollment, how do the trailers fit into that? Do they?
No, the trailers are not. I mean, enrollment, obviously the students are at a school, they're counted, but the trailers have no impact on the capacity. In fact, if a classroom is used, you have rooms out there now that are used as classrooms. If they were not originally designed as a classroom, it doesn't increase the capacity of the school. And it would actually, under this assessment, if they were using, just say it was a resource room as a classroom, it would actually help, it would make the school less compliant, if that makes sense.
Yes. That was my understanding. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, folks, time to show your hand here. We have two criteria, and we just need to, I guess, try to reach a consensus on it, but we'll see where we are. We have the third option, which is where I was going. I guess I should go through them all just to make sure there's nobody that's changed their mind. So we'll go through all 4 of them again. On the first option, no change, maintain current queue. All those who support that as the right way to go. You're only voting once. I'm hoping that this isn't Chicago, but so all those who want option number 1, no change, raise your hand, please. Okay, see nobody. Option number 2, revisit criteria, maintain current queue. Anybody for that particular option? I see 0. Now to 3, revisit criteria and maintain funded or named projects in the CIP cash flow. Reassess all other remaining projects in the queue using new criteria. All those who support that? So 2, 4, 6, 8. I got 8. Okay. And number 4, no change to the criteria, maintain funded or named projects in the CIP cash flow, reassess all of the remaining projects in the queue using current criteria. Those in favor of that particular approach, please raise your hand. I get 4. Okay. We will leave this information with the chairman, and she can take that to schedule this as we need to. So it's now all her fault. So the meeting managers have
the chairman
done
head
their
off
job.
on work days.
We've done
work session days.
our very tardy job here. So we have one more issue for this section, and we want to try to move quickly on it, and maybe we won't be but an hour behind at that point. The third item was on, I have to bring it up, community engagement and facility planning, and staff member want to at least speak to that for us, please.
Right here, I'm going to try to make this very brief. Just wanted to share with you that we have started the Region 3 community engagement by sending out the invites. We do have it scheduled for 4 days, and it should be coming up on the screen, but it's March 19th. That's this Thursday is the first one. The second one is Monday, March 23rd. And then after spring break, we have Wednesday, April 8th and Wednesday, April 15th. So we've asked the community members to go ahead and register for one of the meetings, and they could register for more than one meeting if they would like, as long as there's capacity at those sites. And we're going to handle the community engagement meetings in like 3 different phases. This is the first phase, so all 4 meetings that are scheduled is the first phase, which is kind of getting some feedback on our comprehensive plan, the conceptual design of what this would look like within the Region 3 area. And then we would have the boundary scope engagement in the fall, and then we would actually have the boundary study engagement in the spring. Okay? So within the current community engagement, we are going to be providing some information on the programs that are within the Region 3 area, as well as any planned new programs within that region, and then asking for feedback about types of programs they would like to see in that particular area. And then we'll also be sharing the current enrollment status and the projections, and then we're going to be sharing the maps of that area showing two different facility solutions. If you recall, in that region, we had identified a new elementary school to mitigate some of the overcrowding. But since then, we've been approved or received the grant to build Fort Belvoir. And then with all the other renovations that are going on in that area, we're also recommending that when we renovate Bucknell Elementary School, that we bring up that capacity to 600. So there are some additional elementary school seats that we hadn't originally anticipated when we were identifying the new elementary school site.
So this would give the community the opportunity to weigh in on the CIP, kind of on a conceptual level. Boundary studies get very, very specific, and so that there's a time and a place, and we will be moving that forward to that process too. But we first need to step back and say, is this the right direction for the community and the schools in these areas? We've worked really hard. All the days have been coordinated with the board members. We've been meeting. We've also had at least one meeting with FPAC on this specific issue. We have another one scheduled because we believe that they can play a major role in this work moving forward. We believe this is just a starting point, and after, Region 3 had a lot of decisions that are time sensitive, and so we felt like we need to start with Region 3 for, I think it's obvious reasons for this board. And then, assuming we get, at some point in May, I believe, we're planning to bring back to you what we've heard from the community and what our recommendation would be moving forward, because that would affect the 2015 bond and some of the projects that we have just right around the corner. After that point, then we'll begin a boundary scoping process and the complete boundary process. We also anticipate that we will begin in the other regions throughout our county doing something similar, taking the CIPA out to the community, allowing our constituents to weigh in and give us some feedback, and then at different times throughout this next year, we'll bring back that feedback to you all. So this Region 3 would be our starting point, just because some of the decisions we need to make down the road are time sensitive, but we think this is a good way to allow the community to weigh in.
Thank you, Dr. Garza. We have Ms. Schultz, and anybody else, let us know if you want to speak to it.
Okay, so Ms. Quinn, I just had a question. Maybe it's for the Region 3 people. So are we taking into account the contemplated housing decisions that are before the Board of Supervisors in the Region 3 area? Because the number of rent-controlled units that are being proposed by them would, I think, tremendously impact, any of these decisions. And I just don't know where we are in terms of our decision-making and their potential approval of a massive number of increased rent-controlled units. And then the second is, have we formally invited the Board of Supervisors to these meetings? And if not, I think we should.
We have not formally invited the Board of Supervisors, but we definitely can.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go ahead and do that. And then I believe all the additional developments that are planned for the area, that is taken into consideration as we're developing the capacity down the road. Because, projections. Because what we're going to be providing is what our current enrollment status is and where we think we'll be 5 years from now as the projects are coming to conclusion.
Will we include in the community meetings the proposed housing and the specific impact of the proposed housing, should it be approved by the Board of Supervisors, on the schools? Like, are we going to provide that link that, hey, if the Board of Supervisors goes ahead and approves these proposed rent-controlled units, this is the end impact in terms of the increase, and who's deriving those projections? Are they giving us the projections for the numbers of families and students, or are we coming up with our own?
As we had briefed in the past when we gave the work session on actually proffers and our forecast yields, we're involved in the process throughout, and we did show in one of the attachments about when things are planned and when their fruition is, and also how we accommodate and fold that into our projection methodology. So yeah, it is included. No, we don't go into the level of detail in that articulation with the community about that. Yes, we do show maps that show the growth in the different areas and different regions. In fact, we have those maps to have this conversation, to engage in the dialogue. This dialogue is much more than capacity, though, in the Region 3.
Ms. Schultz, you all set? I have Mr. Velkoff.
I have two questions right now. The first one has to do with the sign up for the community engagement. Before the break, I met with a couple of the folks out there, and they were very concerned that it seemed as if the process for signing up was going to exclude folks from attending any more than one session. So I wanted to just get an understanding of actually how the sign-up process is working.
I just received confirmation from our communications office. They are able to sign up for more than one location, but because the way SurveyMonkey registration is set up, they do have to fill out multiple registrations. So for each site, they will have to go in and fill out the registrations. But my understanding is that you should be able to sign up for more than one location.
Okay, so we're not trying to restrict people from...
No, and
Yeah.
if that's not working, please let us know and we could look into it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so they're aware. My other question had to do with some of the fine print, programming at schools. And what are you currently envisioning in terms of what's going to be shown to the public, and what kind of feedback will we be expecting from the public about this?
So I think Dr. Garza does want to chime in, but I just wanted to share with everyone that the information we shared with the public is now posted under Region 3 website. So we have the program information, the maps, enrollment status, all that posted for the public to review. So you should be able to find that information, but I believe Dr. Garza wanted to chime in on the program.
What we're doing is we're sharing with them kind of currently what is unique program that we have within each feeder pattern. You know, what is currently in place that's unique and different, like in the West Potomac Pyramid or the Mount Vernon Pyramid. Some of the plans that are underway to add enriched programming, but also allow the community to say what's missing. What would you find compelling enough to continue to send your children to our schools in this feeder pattern. So I think it was a unique opportunity because we're engaging the community for them to weigh in about, you know, do we have enough STEM education? Do we have enough fine arts programming? Do we need more career academies? So it's really just giving them an opportunity to weigh in about what we need to consider in terms of unique educational programming down the road.
So really quickly, could that include listing programs that are in other areas of the county that maybe are not in the West Potomac Pyramid or Mount Vernon or Edison or wherever, but just to give folks a sense of what's out there, because not all parents are aware of all the variety of things that are available throughout the county. I mean, is there going to be any kind of list like that? I mean, for instance, Bailey's, right? There's this wonderful arts program at Bailey's, and if you might not know about it, and coming as a citizen walking in, you might not even know to even ask for something like that.
I think it's a good point. I think we could think about that. I think most parents, most constituents may not come in and tell us exactly what's missing. I mean, exactly what to do. I think they can tell us what they don't see enough of, right? And then we would be charged with coming back to figure out how do we design something to meet the needs of their children. So I think we could provide them kind of what is out there potentially. I wouldn't expect them to give us specifics about how to design it, but just tell us what they feel like. And I think most parents can tell us what they think is missing, or what we need to make sure that we protect and maintain. For example, I know Holland Meadows. They have a garden that they're very, very proud of, and a whole environmental science kind of focus that I think they're very, very proud of. I know they are. So I know they're very interested in making sure that that's protected and maintained down the road. So it's just really giving a community the opportunity to weigh in on that, whatever they want to say about that.
Okay. Ms. Jana Koufax?
Susan, could you just again explain where it is on the homepage? Where
if you go under learning about our region offices off the main webpage, it's on the left-hand side.
Learn about your school's region. Got it.
Go to Region 3.
Okay.
And then there should be a link to the right, learn more about, or upcoming Region 3 community meetings, learn more.
I don't see it on my iPad. That's what let's see. If I tap on Region 3.
I know it's there because I checked
Region for 3 facilities.
Yes.
Yep, got it. I do want to say that I am very much in favor of Mr. Velkoff's suggestion because I think some of the community is coming with some knowledge, but many of at this meeting may not come with knowledge about what is available, say in, that we have a fine arts academy out at Fairfax High School. Not everybody may know that. And how could that play into something in the area? I think that would be important, just to have other points of information.
Thank you, Ms. Jana Koufax. Anybody else want to speak to this issue? I will speak to it then. First off, thank you. I think it's been a long time getting to where we are, and I'm very pleased we're here. And I know it's taken a lot of work, a lot of time and effort for a lot of meetings, and I particularly appreciate Dr. Garza and your very busy schedule, the amount of time and effort that you've devoted to trying to address these. And actually your comments today, I think, are very powerful, and ones that I definitely want to reiterate to the community, and I will take the opportunity to reiterate to the community about what we're trying to do in terms of getting the conceptual part of it right, but just as importantly, what's missing in our programs, as well as what we want to protect. I mean, we don't always think about it both ways, but Holland Meadows is a great example of a school that's spent a lot of time trying to protect something that they think is valuable. Did you want to?
Okay. I just want to say something that one of the constituents at a meeting this weekend pointed out to me. We have it was a little confusing, so maybe what we need to do is we need to, and this is the first time I've looked at it since I was told this, so sample Region 3 programs, these are programs within the school, and then it says sample Region 3 programs, those are more after-school programs. So if we can highlight that, and they're a little mixed. Like one is Avid, so that's in there, but then they have GEMS Club, and they have things like, Vex Robotics Club. So it's a little confusing.
At my office hours on Saturday, that was what was pointed out to me, and I was actually going to make that point. But thank you. I think
So
there's some clarity that could help.
If staff could kind of pull out those programs that are clearly after-school programs, and then those that can, like an Avid program that can be high school based, but maybe is not. Maybe just stick that up there in the high schools that has the Avid program. The 3 high schools that have that.
Okay. I wanted to clarify something I know, Ms. Schultz, I know you were asking about this, and I want to this is one of the questions that we get constantly, and I always am a little bit I'm always not as clear as I want to be on this. At what point in time it hits our list of things that we then project enrollment for versus when we don't? I know if it's in the comprehensive plan as a potential, we don't count that. If it's a planned submission to the zoning folks or the building folks, does that count? Or is it once it's approved, does it count? Or is it once they've done some kind of construction next step, is that actually in our enrollment projections for the work that we're doing?
That's a
I
good
know there's
question.
a line there somewhere, and I'm just trying to
Well,
figure out where that is.
one, if we're, and you know, the biggest challenge for us is knowing when the development is actually going to occur. If you recall, during the proffer presentation, Greg Boken from our staff showed that development in Tyson's, there were 7 buildings, but only 1 had been constructed. I think at the time that we thought there would be 3 or 4. So some of it has to do with the private capital market, how quickly these develop. That being said, you know, so then our staff actually goes out to look. So it isn't just whether they have a construction permit, you want to see the progress. So let's say hypothetically, if these were to start today, would I count them in 5 years? The answer would be yes.
On Thursday, you're going to be asked this question. How will you answer this question?
Well,
Because that's the core of what I hear constantly in the community is, what do they count? Did they count this project? Did they count that project? This, you know, this project going to have a particular yield, and that project was going to have a different yield.
The yield, I'll double check with the planning staff regarding the yield. The timing is a whole nother ballgame.
I'm happy to defer to something you send to us, not to take time of us here, but I would like to get something more concrete that I can then kind of recirculate to the community.
Well, I'll do the best I can to have it by Thursday. I mean, it's Monday afternoon.
If you could do it by then, that'd be.
Yeah, but he's asking for the specific ones in Mount Vernon.
I am, but I'm also looking for the general rule that you follow.
Yeah.
And I realize there's exceptions to every rule, but just what that general rule is.
Yeah.
And the last point I want to make is that, and this is a more broader issue that I know that when we go to other regions, people might have similar kinds of feelings as I have about this. I think we have a very comprehensive process with the 4 different meetings. That's, I think, that's exceptional. The number of opportunities people have to go to meetings and learn about and provide input, I think that's wonderful. I'm very pleased with that. And then staff will be looking and trying to putting this together with some sort of presentation, some sort of recommendation to the board. One of the things that I particularly would prefer, and I'm advocating for, is that we have at least another follow-on community meeting where the community gets to hear, at least in general, here's the direction that staff's going with their recommendation, and they'd have a chance to provide their input before it comes to the board, much like we do in a boundary process. But it is a way for at least the community to push back. I mean, I know that maybe not all of us here would want to approach it that way. I know that if we don't do it as a broad staff or broad kind of a board engagement, I know individually I want to have that kind of engagement, but I'm advocating, I think there's value to having it be a kind of a broader engagement with the community by staff. So it's my own approach and how I would look at this, but I would ask other board members if they feel similarly, then if you could weigh in on that, and maybe there would be follow-up meetings if you all feel similarly. And then Ms. Hines wanted to speak.
Sorry, I actually had a question that I thought of as you were talking. So for those of us in other regions where we know that we have pretty large pockets and areas that, we know we're going to need new schools, boundary changes, I mean, they actually have a lot of the same issues that you have down there in that area. What's the thinking on, when, say, I could get a region in my area on the docket in a way for this kind of community engagement?
We're actually developing a timeline. I've seen a draft of it. It wasn't just quite ready for prime time yet, but we should have that ready soon. That would show you as board members when we anticipate all these other community engagement meetings to occur, and we are timing them around critical projects. So one of your areas is one of the next ones because of the Coates, McNair, that kind of challenge we have in that area. So that's actually Region 2, and so that one would come up next. But we're looking at preparing for you all the kind of the big picture. So over this next really calendar year, when would all of these occur? And we expect to have them all done, kind of the big picture kind of conversations done, by the end of this next school year. But it would not be all the boundary, those kind of are on a different cycle. I think the only boundary scoping study we'll have next year is around some of these elementary schools that we're talking about from Region 3. But we're looking at trying to create for you the big picture, which I think is what your question is.
Anybody else? Ms. Schultz, go back.
Just briefly, I know that you struggle to find out when the information is and when we can find out as a board. And I maintain that that's still part of the problem. And I know we discussed this previously at the proffer presentation. But when you said, Mr. Steen, when you go out to see a site and look at the potential impact, and is it going to be one building built or 3 buildings or 4 buildings, whether it's in Ms. Hines' area or Mr. Storks or mine, the problem is that we as board members don't know this is happening until the end of the process when we get the proffer notice. And it's only because of the significant potential impact in Ms. Evans' area and yours and Ms. Derenak Koufax's area with these contemplated huge rent-controlled units that the Board of Supervisors are likely to support, that it does trigger not only an issue just in your, that's a division-wide. And that's why I'm hoping that somehow in this process, regardless of what region it's in, and that's why I said I think we should invite the whole Board of Supervisors. I think we should invite Chairman Bulova. I think we've got to invite them into these conversations so that they understand how some of the decisions and the path of the decision-making that they're on, how significantly they will impact us. And we don't know early enough in the process as our own board members where we are and help to find that out.
Mr. Stork, I think as a part of the last work session, there was a commitment to have that as a part of the legislative portion from board to board. There was.
Well, I think the request
to
was
reconvene the IFC.
to reconvene
IFC.
the IFC, so that some of these issues could be taken up.
Because it works so well.
But I do appreciate that advocacy, Ms. Schultz. I think it's important we can invite them. I think that's the very least we can do, and there's 4. This one coming up Friday is a little quick notice, but there's several, and I think that's a good idea.
Unless I hear something else, were there any follow-ups to this? I don't, did you recall?
The main thing is we'll be bringing back what we hear, and it'll be brought to the board for consideration, so.
All right. Did you? All right. Well, I think we're all set, unless somebody has some additions to our next steps. I have invited Jerry Highland personally to the, but we should invite all the members to him. Yes.
So,
Ms. Smith, yes.
I've just been playing with the website to find the information about those Region 3 community meetings. It's not intuitive where to find the information. I'm wondering if it could be listed in the highlights section on the main page to get a link from there.
Thank you. I have to admit, I had not thought about that, but you're all said. Ms. Evans?
Should we capture what Dr. Garza just told us, that we would be seeing the community engagement for all the other regions?
The next step is that she'll be issuing that sometime in the next month, 2 months, 3 months. You want to give us?
The overall timeline, I'm sure we'll have ready in several weeks, a couple weeks probably. Don't you think? And this is just big picture timeline, and it's not,
yes.
It won't give you the specific dates. It just gives you general timeframes and when to expect the other region community engagement to occur and any major other boundary studies and that kind of thing.
Anything else? Any other next steps, folks? Any next steps in general for facilities? We're getting ready to close this part of the conversation. Right on time, I might point out to you all. It depends on what time zone you're in, that's all. With that, we will take a 5-minute break for my colleague who will remain nameless, and we will then come back to doing budget and Ms. Reed on budget. Thank you.